Can you hear me?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, yes, we can hear you.
Oh, Haribol, how are you?
Yeah, fine. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to join and give your valuable association to us.
If you can follow what I'm saying.
Yeah, we will try.
Okay, so we start.
Yeah, Madan Mahan will lead our today meeting. Madan Mahanji, Hare Krishna, can you hear us? Just few seconds he will arrange his translation, because he arranged translation for Russian language.
Okay, and it's simultaneous. I don't have to wait.
No, it will be simultaneously. It will be simultaneously.
That's pretty clever.
He will arrange, yeah, to save your time. Save your time, Maharaj.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think so. Now I have a PowerPoint, so that's going to go on in Russian there already on your screen, or what? How does it work?
No,
or I'd have it.
Not now. Not now.
We will start presentation in Russian language. We have translation.
Where is Madan Mahan?
He's there, but I don't hear him.
No, he cannot speak because he is speaking for a Russian audience. He cannot speak simultaneously with you.
Okay, so does he have this PowerPoint or not? Otherwise, I'll just English version.
I am his assistant. I will start presentation whenever you need. Whenever you tell, I will start immediately.
Okay. So I guess you start. We just start now. Is that problem? Does that work?
Oh, okay. I am doing.
Just maybe 1-2 minutes. I will make some presentation. You introduce you for Russia. Of course, everybody know you well. I will speak Russian. If I speak Russian, Madan Mahan can translate to you in English, or how we do it.
Matter, just do whatever. I don't care. Save time.
Дорогие преданные, мы рады вам представить его святейшество Бану Махараджа, и, конечно, многие из вас слышали его лекции. Для меня, конечно, это удивительный опыт общения с таким возвышенным преданным, что одновременно редко в материальном мире вы встретите очень ученого человека и очень смиренного. Такие качества, они несочетаемы, только преданный может сочетать эти качества. Поэтому, пожалуйста, прошу любить и жаловать, Бану с вами. Yeah, thank you, Maharaj. We can start.
Okay. So the topic is Bhakti and Varnashram. And of course, we all know about Bhakti. We got a lot of literature by Rupa Goswami and others. But Varnashram, actually, we don't have much. So this is an interesting thing, but I'll explain why also. So just to review the Bhakti part, and Bhakti with the relationship Varnashram, usually Varnashram is mentioned in relation to Bhakti, and usually it gets criticized or rejected. That's the whole thing. So this leads to a problem in ISKCON, because we have this, whole idea we have to do Varnashram or whatever like that. So I'll just give a little introduction to Varnashram as it is criticized, usually it's criticized by our Goswamis and others. Of course, it has good points also. What is that Varnashram? So, of course, it is, there's whole texts, many texts called the Smriti Shastras, like 21 texts, including Manu Smriti, Vishnu Smriti, Parasara Smriti, etc., which deal with the rules of the Varnashram system. It is largely a political system. There's the king, who was hereditary, and he has a dynasty. And of course, the sun god had Ikshvaku and Manu, Vajrasata Manu, and that whole dynasty came down. Out of that came the sun dynasty, then the moon dynasty, and Ramchandra and Krishna. So these dynasties were hereditary dynasties, and they established this Varnashram system. Yeah? So largely, it is political. It's how to arrange the kingdom politically, and then institute certain laws, varnas and ashramas. So there's very strict divisions of varnas or professions according to gunas. And we know that Sudras are tamagun, Vaishyas are tamagun, rajagun, Kshatriyas are rajagun, sattvagun, and Brahmas are sattva gun prominently. So they have mixture, but prominently sattva gun. So based on that, we have professions for the Brahmins, priests and teachers, kshatriyas, warriors, soldiers, things like administrators, and vaishyas, traders, merchants, farmers, etc., and laborers of various sorts like potters and blacksmiths and dealing with iron crafts, etc., all considered sudras. And it was largely based upon birth. Your father is a Sudra, you're a Sudra, you're a Kshatriya, your son is a Kshatriya, etc. And that was the general system. And of course, the Varnas have the particular rules. So as far as education, the upper classes, that is the Vaishyas, Kshatriyas, and Brahmanas, get a spiritual education, theoretically. That is, they're allowed to study the Vedas. They get Brahma Gayatri Mantra and they're allowed to study the Vedas, but usually it was the Brahmanas who studied more of the Vedas. And then renunciation is part of the upper Varnas. You can take Vanaprastha if you're a Vaishya or Kshatriya. And if you're a Brahmana, you can take sannyas. So Varnas, the ashramas are particular for certain Varnas also. Sudras have only one ashram, grihastha ashram. So as well as profession, along with that profession, of course, you don't mix also. You stay within your Varna, you don't marry within your Varna with other Varnas, you don't talk to other Varnas. It's quite strict. The social codes. And even like 500 years ago, when the first Europeans came, they were very amused by the way in which the Brahmin community was completely separate from everybody else. If a Brahmana in Kerala walked down the street, other people could not show their face. They had to hide within their shops. Sudras could not approach at all. So it was very, very strict even 500 years ago. And there are common codes for everybody, like nonviolence, the position of woman, avoidance of sins, and performance of pious activities. But even the sins and the sins particularly are different for different Varnas. So the Sudras and Kshatriyas and Vaishyas can drink and gamble, but the Brahmin shouldn't. It's a sin for the Brahmana, but not for the others. So even the sinful activities are various with the different castes or Varnas. And they have different types of punyas, like assistance to others, service to elders, giving in charity, serving guests in the house, which is quite important. And therefore, if you go to India, sometimes everybody, if you go to a grihastha family, they want to serve everybody. So that's just a tradition that they have to serve the guests. And probably in all the ancient society is like that. Even if you go to probably in Russia or even in Arabic country, you have to feed the guest, have to treat the guest nicely. Cultivation of cleanliness, internal and external, celebration of festivals, performance of vows. At least once a year, you do some sort of vow, like fasting or whatever. Protection of animals, increasing the population, and conduct like forgiveness, gratitude, truthfulness, etc. So these are the things. And of course, there's sinful activities, violence, cruelty, hypocrisy, mental illusion, lying, disobedience to superiors, lust, selfishness, impurity, rude conduct, and destructiveness. So these are considered to be sinful. There's many. I just took these sins and piety from Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Chaitanya Shikshamrita because it was easily available, but so I just listed those things there. So as well as that, then the sins and the piety or the pap and the punya, we have something called nitya kriyas, which are very typical in the varnashram system, even though in ISKCON we just forget about them. But these are integral part, particularly for the Brahmana. The daily activities, nitya means daily here. So every day you have to do these. If you don't do them, it's a sin. So there's with their rituals, the ritualized things using Vedic mantras usually. So you have to bathe every day early in the morning. and you do that in a certain way, chanting certain mantras, etc., putting the water on at a certain time, whatever, dressing in a certain way, etc. There's something called Sandhya Vandana, which is a ritual of, around the Brahma Gayatri mantra. So you chant that mantra, but before that, you have purificatory activities using Vedic mantras, and then you, like with like an achaman and whatever like that, you do various worship of the sun god, etc. And then you do a vahana, you call the deity of Gayatri, then you chant your japa, then you tell the deity to go away. And so it's a half-hour ceremony you do 3 times a day. And this is typical of the Brahmins particularly, but Kshatris and Vaishyas also are supposed to do this once they get the Brahma Gayatri mantra. We have Agnihotra, a daily activity of fire sacrifice. You do a daily fire sacrifice. So a Grihasta is supposed to do that daily fire sacrifice, which is Vedic. A recitation to the Vedas has to be done every day. Welcoming and feeding guests, worship of ancestors, worship of devatas and the Supreme Lord. So all of these are daily activities that a normal upper class person should do. Then we have the naimittic kriyas, or occasional activities, occasional rituals. So shraddha rites are things we don't do every day. They're done periodically when a person dies, or for every month after he dies for 1 year. Then once a year, the shraddha rites go on for that particular person. These are the death rites, or offering to the pitras. So they are quite an elaborate type of ritual. The first set is like 13 days of rituals, and then every year once you do this. And then others, the samskars, which we're a little bit familiar with. So these are Vedic rituals for different events of the grihasta, mainly the grihasta's life. So we have the Garbhadan samskar, which Prabhupada speaks of, Pumsavana for making a male child, Simantoyana, parting of the hair of the woman, I think in the 5th month of pregnancy, Jat Karma, at the birth, there's a ceremony, naming the child, Nishkramana, first outing of the child after 1 month, feeding the child the first grains, Annaprasana, cutting the hair, and piercing the ears. And then we have educational samskars, beginning the education, learning the alphabet, Upanayinam, getting the sacred thread when you're 5 or 7 years old, which allows you to enter the Gurukul, and then you begin your Vedic studies, and then there's a Keshanta, shaving the hair, the beard, and then Samavartana, graduation from the Gurukul. Then we have marriage samskar. And then, of course, after marriage, there's children, and you go through all these birth ceremonies again for the grihasta. And then finally, this is the death ceremonies. So these are called the naimittic kriyas, occasional activities. So all of the people in the varnashram system are supposed to do these. They're less complex for the sudras, but very complex for the upper varnas, and particularly the brahmanas. So that's also part of the varnashram system. And if you don't do those activities, then you're not really following dharma. So this is the normal varnashram system. But when we talk about varnashram, we don't even consider these activities. We do a few samskars, maybe marriage, and that's about it. So of course, according to Jaiva Dharma, Bhaktivinoda Thakur's book, it's not so much about birth, but based upon your nature and your qualification. Then you take your varna according to that. So that's what varnashram means traditionally. But now let us talk about our movement, which is based on bhakti. So our acharyas make it very clear that bhakti is the prominent sadhana, not varnashram. Then we call these things smarta activities. And Prabhupada often uses the word smarta. So basically it means these varnashramic rituals, the nitya kriyas and the naimittic kriyas. These are all varnashramic activities. So we tend to reject those as being non-obligatory. We don't want to do them every day. Rather, we want to do bhakti every day. So we find in our very definition of bhakti how there's more or less a criticism of these other activities. So in our basic definition given in the Nectar of Devotion of Rupa Goswami, Anya Abhalashaja Shunya, it should be Jnana Karma Janavratam. It is not obstructed or covered by Jnana karma, etc. So I think it's Jiva's explanation, the word karma refers to the daily, that's anitya kriyas and naimittic kriyas of the smritis, that is varnashram activities. So we can't cover up or obstruct the bhakti by these things. Of course, it also means that it can't be covered up or obstructed. It doesn't mean we don't do them, but they can become an obstacle to bhakti also. So in this sense, there's a negative aspect of these rituals. So how do they become negative? If we're performing those varnashramic activities, nitya kriyas, naimittic kriyas, with a faith, we have to do these, and if we don't do them, we're sinful. This becomes an obstacle to bhakti. If we say they will produce bhakti, again, this is an obstacle to bhakti. Yeah. So one can do the activities, shraddhas, or chanting the Gayatri mantra with the rituals, etc. If we don't have faith in their absolute nature, and we're doing them just to instruct other people who don't have faith, that at least they should do nitya kriyas and varnashram dharma if they don't do bhakti. So then you can do them, but otherwise they're not so essential. So that's basically the attitude of our acharyas towards that aspect of varnashram system. And later on, Rupa Goswami says that the consensus of those knowledgeable of bhakti is that karma or varnashram duties is not an anga of bhakti. So it's not part of bhakti, it's an accompaniment to bhakti, which you may or may not do. You can do, you may not do it. And especially if it's going to be done with very strong faith in it, then it becomes an obstacle to pure bhakti as well. So we have this verse, Prabhupada also quotes it often, Varnashrama Charavata Purushena Parapaman Vishnu Arajate Panta Nanya Tatosha Karanam. And so the Lord is to be worshipped through the duties of Varnashram system. So this is from the Vishnu Purana, and it kind of equates Varnashram with bhakti. But then it's explained by Jiva Goswami Vishwanath that this is only to encourage people who are not qualified with bhakti, that you can do this system. And it's also satisfying to the Lord. And if we fail to perform bhakti, then that's a fault. But if we fail to perform the duties of varna and ashram, it's not a fault. So this again emphasizes the importance of bhakti and the secondary nature of varnashramic rules. And if he commits a sin, then there's no atonement according to varnashram, etc. He simply continues his bhakti. As well, if we read and study the Chaitanya Charitamrita, we'll see in the teachings of Lord Chaitanya that he often rejects this varnashram system. In talking to Ramananda Roy, Ramananda Roy first mentions varnashram, and then Lord Chaitanya rejected it. It's all external, eho bhaya. Tell me something else. I don't want to hear about this varnashram system. And of course, Prabhupada also comments in the fourth canto, for instance, one simply execute the rules and regulation of the varnashram dharma in the role of a Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Sudra, and keeps busy and does not remember one's eternal relationship with the Lord, one's business activities as well as occupational duties will simply be a waste of time. So independently, varnashram is useless. If we combine it with bhakti, it's kind of acceptable. And if we do bhakti with a little varnashram, but it doesn't obstruct, we can do it. But if we depend on it within our bhakti, it becomes an obstruction. In the opinion of the Lord, the system of varnashram dharma is superficial only, and it's very little to do with the highest realization of spiritual values. This is from the introduction to the Srimad Bhagavatam also. So here, Prabhupada himself is also saying not too much valuable, this Varnashram Dharma. Lord Chaitanya also, when he met in South India, he met the followers of Madhvacharya, who was a great Vaishnava, and were also coming in the Madhva Sampradaya. So the Acharya said activities of the four castes and four ashrams are dedicated to Krishna. They constitute the best means whereby one can attain the highest goal of life. So he's advocating Varnashram system as the proper mode of conduct. And Lord Chaitanya said, according to the verdict of the Shastras, the process of hearing and chanting is the best means to attain loving service to Krishna. So he also rejects the Varnashram system as the solution to everything. And he simply said, you depend on bhakti, hearing and chanting. And so Prabhupada in some places also minimizes the importance of Varnashram. For instance, here's some of the teachings of Kapila. Formerly, the Varnashram Dharma was prominent. Everyone had particular duty according to his position in society. Now the occupational duties have expanded, but it does not matter whether one is an engineer, a doctor, or whatever. Simply try to serve Krishna by the result of work. That is bhakti. It is not the philosophy of this Krishna conscious movement to disengage people from their activities. So he doesn't consider it so important in this particular statement. Here's from the Madhya Lila. To spread Krishna consciousness, one needs only be cognizant of the science of the spirit's soul. It does not matter whether one is a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra, Sannyasi, Grihastha, or whatever. If one simply understands this science, he can become a spiritual master. Here's another, it's from a letter in a morning walk in Mayapur, 1976. So the Varnashram Dharma is good help undoubtedly, but it is not important for Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, how could I start this movement in the Western country? There was no Varnashram Dharma, but that did not hamper my movement. Now people are surprised how these people have become such great devotees. So it was not based on Varnashram Dharma, no, because the whole movement is spiritual. So here again, Prabhupada is not putting too much emphasis upon it. It is very difficult to be a Brahmin in this age, and it is practically impossible to revive the old Varnashram Dharma culture. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore said that this method is not very practical. And of course, we often associate farms with Varnashram. Of course, it's part of Varnashram, but even you can have a farm with not Varnashram also. And of course, Krishna lived in Dwarka, that wasn't a farm. So in Varnashram system, you have cities, you have farms, you have all sorts of things, not just farms. Regarding the farm opening is not very essential, but if you can do it conveniently, then do it. The Varnashram system is for convenience sake in the material world, has nothing to do with spiritual life. Mayapur, 1974, letter to Hamsadutta. So we find these are the negative aspects of Varnashram Dharma because this is our topic. Now we have the glorification of Varnashram. Of course, the Bhagavad
Maharaj, we cannot hear you. У Махараджа, похоже, пропала связь. Сейчас ждем, что все восстановится.
Okay.
And Maharaj, you can continue. Yeah, we can see you and hear.
So the purpose is scientific. Therefore, if we accept the okay, fine. Yeah, I'm working from a phone now because the line's not working. I'm using my phone. Next slide. So Prabhupada here says, our goal is Varnashram. The Krishna consciousness movement, however, is being propagated all over the world to reestablish the Varnashram Dharma system and thus save human society from gliding down to hellish life. So here Prabhupada is supporting and saying, reestablish Varnashram Dharma, whereas previously it's not very important. And of course, we have famous quotes like this out in this room when he made the statement, 50% of my work is not complete because I have not established Varnashram. So this is quoting Abhiram Das in well, that's his, can't be 1996, obviously. This maybe when he wrote his book or something like that. But anyway, this is a famous statement, 50% is not complete, I have to do Varnashram. So we have the like conflicting ideas here from Srila Prabhupada. In some places he says not very important, and then he says very important, or half my work is only done unless I establish Varnashram. So it's a little perplexing about how to do that. Of course, we can also combine the two systems. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, taking full shelter in me with the mind carefully fixed in the devotional service to the Lord as spoken by me. One should live without personal desire and practice the social and occupational system called Varnashram. So at best, we can't just do Varnashram itself. It must be combined with devotional service or bhakti. At the same time, we cannot just kill the virus has to be modified, and therefore concept of acknowledgement of social status according to birthright, because in Bhagavad Gita it is said that the determining considerations are guna and karma, one's qualities and work. It is this Daiva Varnashram that should be established all over the world to continue a perfect society for Krishna consciousness. This may be astonishing to foolish Christians, but it's one of the functions of the Krishna conscious society. So here Prabhupada is saying that we want to have a Varnashram system, but not based upon birth, right? But based upon guna and karma instead. So this idea of Daiva Varnashram comes from Bhaktivinoda Thakur. I think he's the first one that mentions that. Here's some 7th canto. The Grihastha, Vanaprastha, Brahmacharis, and Sannyasis should endeavor together with a total energy to become Krishna conscious. This type of civilization is called Daiva Varnashram. So it's a mixture of having the varnas and the ashramas, and at the same time practice Krishna. Get trained. Srila Prabhupada says that training is the Varnashram Dharma. Divide the society according to quality and train people in the principle that everything belongs to God and should be used in the service of God. Then there really can be one nation under God. So we should have training according to our qualities and at the same time practice Krishna consciousness. So that's the general definition Prabhupada is giving. Here's from the 11th canto. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, a self-realized person who has cultivated scriptural knowledge up to the point of enlightenment and who is free from impersonal speculation, understanding the material universe to be simply illusion, should surrender unto me, both that knowledge and the means by which he achieved it. So ultimately, whatever we do, we have to just surrender to the Supreme Lord somehow or other. The great endeavor one undergoes in executing the ordinary social and religious duties of the Varnashram system, in performing austerities and hearing about the Vedas, culminates only in the achievement of mundane fame and opulence. by respecting and attentively hearing the recitation of transcendental qualities of the Supreme Lord, the husband of the goddess of fortune, one can remember his lotus feet. So again, there's more emphasis put upon bhakti than the varnashram system. So this kind of summarizes the, let's say, the acharyas, Gaudiya acharyas' view of varnashram and how it relates to bhakti. And obviously, bhakti is much more prominent, and varnashram is dependent and should never obstruct it in any way. And we have quotes from Srila Prabhupada also to say the same thing. But then we have these other quotations of Prabhupada where he emphasizes we have to introduce varnashram or daiva varnashram as part of our mission. Of course, for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, of course, he criticizes it, but at the same time, we see that his followers followed it also. So Lord Chaitanya's followers were, most of them were grihastas, and they followed grihasta dharma in the varnashram system. Many were brahmanas, some were kshatriyas, some were vaishyas, and some were sudras, and they followed their particular occupation and the varna rules according to varnashram system. So they didn't go beyond that, but at the same time, they made bhakti very, very prominent. There were a few people who went outside the varnashram system, like Rupa and Sanatana Goswami. They weren't part of the varnashram system, nor than the word even sannyasis. Sannyasa is part of the varnashram system, but they weren't in the varnashram system. They weren't even sannyasis. And similarly, the Babajis are beyond the varnashram system. But by and large, the followers of Lord Chaitanya were cooperating with that system. And they did not even, let's say, break the rules. In general, they didn't break the rules of that system. They followed, and they didn't get criticism from the rest of society. Baladev Vijayabhushan, in his analysis of devotees, he introduces this idea of attachment to varnashram or non-attachment to varnashram. Like we have different ways of categorizing devotees like Kanishta, Madhyama, Uttama, etc. So his classification is according to how they participate in the varnashram system, traditional system. So the Sanishta devotee is attached to varnashramic rules, but forms direct bhakti. But because of his attachment, it gets a little mixed, so it's not really pure bhakti. The Parinishita devotee performs varnashram actions, but is completely unattached to them. And the only reason he does it is to teach the public. So previously I quoted Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur. He says that this is permissible. You can do pure bhakti and you can follow varnashram, but if you're not attached to it and you're just doing it to educate people, other people who have no faith in bhakti, then fine, you can do that. And that's considered to be pure bhakti. So this is the position of a lot of devotees of Lord Chaitanya, in that category. And then the Niropaksha devotee is the one who doesn't participate in the varnashram system at all because of qualification. And that means he is very renounced. So that we put the Babajis and Sanatana Goswami and Rupa Goswami in that category. In one sense, there's no difference between the Parinishta and the Niropaksha, except the Niropaksha is more renounced. But they're both practicing, the Parinishta and Niropaksha are both practicing pure bhakti. But in either case, we see that there's no dependence upon varnashram, whereas the Sanishta is dependent and mixes it with his duties, and he's put in a lesser category. When we come to Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, then he speaks more about varnashram system. We'll see he introduces it in Chaitanya Shikshamrita and in Jaiva Dharma. He speaks quite elaborately on these points of varna, etc. And again, he rejects the birth varna and advises to judge the person by their qualities when they're mature, and then you decide as varna. And he also criticizes the rituals like Sandhya Vandana, etc., as not being so important. And he speaks about Daiva Varnashram. So we select those Varnashramic rules which are favorable to bhakti. And then he calls them Gona Bhakti, or Gona Vidhi, secondary rules of bhakti. And they're particularly for the householder. So he does samskars for his family, etc. He has a profession which is not contrary to bhakti. He maintains his physical and mental health. He carries out his conduct in relation to his wife and his children, according to Varnashramic rules, so he can lead a stable family life. Rules of Varnashram which are favorable for establishing a person so he can be steady in society and his family, or with his body, physical and mental health, these are considered to be fine to adopt. And this is what he called Varnashram, Daiva Varnashram. So he says the physical rules are regulated drinking, of course, not alcohol, other things. Eating, regulated eating, and of course, vegetarian food, prasadam, regulated sleeping, regulated exercise. And of course, if you're sick, then you have methods of curing. That's for the physical body. And you can take those elements of the Varnashram system that deal with your, body and how to care for your body and exercise and whatever, and use those within as a grihasta. For the mind, you would practice concentration, imagination, contemplation, judgment, education, etc. These are all for mental training. Social. So generally, the devotees also follow the samskars, like marriage, etc. And then within married life, grihastha life, then they have their various duties, etc., that they have to do, like not lying, etc., which I mentioned previously. So all these rules are for stability of society and stability of the family. So they are favorable for development of Krishna consciousness also. So therefore, these rules of the Varnashram are adopted by the devotees. So this is the how Bhaktivinoda Thakur implements some aspects of Varnashram. As I said, 500 years ago, the devotees following Lord Chaitanya, they generally follow the Varnashram system with the rituals, marriage, Upanayam, Samskar, as long as the things were not contrary to bhakti. And this was wasn't difficult to follow because the rest of society was doing this, except for the Muslims. They were doing this. But then, of course, over the years, many things happened. So society changed. The British came. They introduced Western education, Western values, Western morality, Western customs, etc. So society in general became more unstable. So at that time, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur again began to stress to some degree following this system, but the Varna by quality, not by birth. So therefore, he has this Daiva Varnashram system with secondary rules of bhakti, but not emphasizing the smarta aspect with nitya and anitya rituals. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur continued in the same way, but he never instituted a detailed plan for Varnashram. The only thing was in the mat, he established brahmacharis, and then of sannyasis. And then, of course, everybody outside the mat was grihastha. So that's as far as he got, as far as Varnashram. I'm not familiar with any of his works in which he details any plan for further instituting a Varnashram system. I don't know about that. So, and now we come to Srila Prabhupada, in which we see he has two types of quotations. Some where he says Varnashram not so important, and others where he emphasizes that my work is incomplete, 50% of my work is done, I should establish Varnashram system. So then it becomes a little problematic for us to see what does he mean by that. Of course, we can get some indication from the writings of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and the actions of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. In other words, we can have brahmacharis, grihastas, vanaprasthas. The ashrams are not so difficult. As for varnas, this is a little more difficult because, of course, by quality, not by birth, but Bhaktivinoda Thakur never established any particular system for establishing varnas, etc., nor did Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Okay? But in general, all we can say is that the bhakti in all cases has to predominate over the varnashram, according to nectar devotion, and it can be an assistant to bhakti for physical, mental, social reasons, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains in Chaitanya Shikshamrita. And largely Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, they avoided the political aspects of establishing, we have to have a king, we can't have the British rulers. They avoided that type of political interference or whatever like that. They didn't want to change the government, or they didn't mention anything like that. And of course, Prabhupada introduced samskars, but we see the samskars are very simplified. When he introduced marriage in the West, they had a fire sacrifice, but the sacrifice was very simplified, not even using Vedic mantras. And of course, the ashram rules also are somewhat simplified. If we look at the Srimad Bhagavatam and the rules for the brahmachari or for the vanaprastha, for the sannyas ashram, they're quite, let's say, strict and quite harsh in one sense. And generally, we don't follow that to that strictness in the modern age. So apart from establishing the ashrams and having, simplified samskars, etc., what aspects of varna are we trying to introduce or whatever? And of course, we can borrow, things from Manu Samhita, but a lot of it looks a little bit impractical. And we can't, take all the rules from Manu Samhita about ashrams and varnas and whatever like that, because they have many things which look very contrary to our present day system and according to modern laws and according to even Vaishnava, Gaudiya Vaishnava Siddhanta. So there's a lot of questions which are open, and we don't have ready answers to that because our acharyas didn't comment on these things, and even Srila Prabhupada didn't go into detail about these things. So therefore, we have a constant debate within ISKCON about how to institute this varnashram system. Many people have many different ideas, and this is just one sample here, Shivram Swami. They had 50 leaders in Hungary, and for 3 days they discussed and discussed, and then out of that they got 2 important issues of varnashram. The relationship between the man and the woman should be established. So these are 2 things that he got out of it, basically, for the grihastas and married life. So of course they could do more, but maybe this was the most important aspect that he was important for fun at the moment. Let's say National Council may have ideas about what to do with this varnashram and how to establish it. Some may think it's more important, some may think it's less important, whatever. And that's also there because Prabhupada himself makes both types of statements on this. So we have questions on this or what?
1 second, we will figure out how to put questions. Yeah, definitely we will ask devotees. Yeah, devotees have questions. Мадана Маханпру, вы тогда подскажите, пожалуйста, как мы дальше все организуем. Преданные, мы тогда можем начать, если кто по-английски может начать задавать вопросы, можно тоже с этого начать, а мы пока сейчас поймем, как в остальном организовать вопросы.
Somebody raised their hand now.
Yeah, but yeah, this first I asked who can ask questions in English. Yeah.
I can ask in English if you don't mind.
Oh,
Yeah,
not a complicated question.
Yeah. Not too complicated. Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for your nice presentation. Very clear, very understandable. One that for the like clarification, you are mentioned 16 samskaras, which is commonly known to the Hindu society, but Prabhupada often mentioned 10 in books. So,
Oh yeah, yeah.
Вы упомянули 16 самскар, но Прабхупада часто в своих...
Yeah. Okay. Different numbers in different pieces, 10, 12, 14, 16, depending on how much detail you want to go into.
Шрила Прабхупада упоминает 10 разных самскар, но их можно начать 16, зависит от того, как их считать.
So 10 for us, 10 is enough, right?
То есть для нас 10 самскар это уже достаточно.
Like there's some like piercing the ears or shaving, so sometimes they don't include those, things like that.
Ведь голову иногда делают второстепенные самскары.
Some may not do the jat karma when the child
не выполняют джата карму, когда ребенок рождается тоже. Некоторые самскары.
You have to go to the hospital and start doing ceremonies, but that's impractical.
Некоторые церемонии просто непрактичны. Yes, Maharaj, sorry, Maharaj, we have figured out how to switch my translation module on and off, so I can translate questions for you. Then I can switch back on the interpretation mode. Sorry.
Yeah. The importance of Prabhupada mentions, of course, are Garbhadan Samskar and marriage.
Важность Гарбадана самскары, упоминает важность брака, самскара, виваха самскара.
And in India, the
Upanayana samskara очень важна.
This is where you get your Brahma Gayatri mantra. This is the big
Brahma
one.
Gayatri мантру. Это очень
The
важно.
other one, the big one is Shraddha. That is
также еще одна самскара Шрада в Индии также очень важная.
What we see for the Gaudiya is the Shraddha. We just kind of we chant Hare Krishna.
Для нас главное самскара повторять Харе Кришна.
Thank you. Thank you.
And as I said, for Prabhupada, for the marriage is basically Hare Krishna also.
Прабхупада также женитьбу проводил, повторял Харе Кришна. Он просто повторял Вайшнава Пранама мантры, повторял Харе Кришна. Вот и вся виваха самскара.
But of course, in India, people would be shocked by that. That's not marriage.
Люди бы шок испытали. Это никакая не свадьба вообще.
So they want to follow strictly the Vedic, the whole procedure with Vedic mantras, etc., for marriage and other ceremonies.
Они хотят заниматься другими видами ведических церемоний, что часто используют ведические мантры.
And even for Garbhadan Samskara, they were asking, well, should we follow Manu for this? And then Prabhupada said, just chant Hare Krishna.
Шрила Прабхупада спрашивает, нужно следовать Ману или как проводить ту церемонию Гарбадана Самскара? Прабхупада сказал, нет, просто повторяйте Харе Кришна. Maharaj, can you hear me translate into Russian? Because I feel that I'm interfering with your presentation. Maharaj, can you hear me now?
Of course. Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. Did you hear me translating to Russian simultaneously?
Yes.
Oh, you were able to hear me. Sorry, because it was supposed to be simultaneous and inaudible for you, but looks like something went wrong. And when I translate it, it's also audible for the audio for you, which wasn't supposed to be. And we have another question. Мандала Патипра, может, что-то можно там настроить? Похоже, что-то вы отключили в настройках, поэтому даже когда я перевожу на русский, Махарадж слышит. Там нужно включить.
Я просто отключил вас, то есть, или если вас включить, то Махарадж вас совсем не будет слушать. Я могу
Я понял. Хорошо, тогда давайте последовательно переводить вопросы. Ишана Прабу, пожалуйста. Да, еще есть вопрос у нас от Дживы Госвами Прабу в чате, который пришел раньше, чем Ишана Прабу понял урок, потом прочитаем его. So the question is, if a Parinishita Vaishnava decides to follow the principles of Varnashrama, where is the border for him that separates excessive following of Varnashrama for a Vaishnava from acceptable following? For instance, samskaras, the etiquette, or is there any particular corpus of Varnashrama rules that are acceptable for Gaudiya Vaishnavas as accepted or introduced by Srila Prabhupada? That's the question. I will repeat it in Russian, Maharaj. Если Вайшнав Паринишита решается все же следовать правилам Варнашрама, то где для него границы, определяющие избыточные для Вайшнава приемлемые практики, например, самскары, этикет взаимодействия и так далее? Есть ли свод правил Варнашрама приемлемых для Гаудия Вайшнава, принимаемых Шрилой Прабхупадой?
So there's too much rules and too much rituals, then we call that smarta. So in the very definition of bhakti, this Jnana Karma Dinavratam, bhakti should not be covered or obstructed by Jnana or Karma, and Karma meant the Nitya Kriyas and the Nimitta Kriyas, etc. So if we get too attached to these rules and we think if we don't do them, and we become sinful or our bhakti is faulty, then this also becomes an obstacle to bhakti, independent of those things. So,
Maharaj, I'll have to translate because I'm not translating simultaneously any longer.
Okay.
Sorry. Бхактивиданта Махарадж ответил, что есть правила, которые мы уже обсудили, правила отношения вайшнавов к различным нити, намитика кармам, оно определяется этим стихом из Бхакти Расамрита Синдху, в котором Шрила Рупа Госвами говорит «Гьяна карма динавритам», что означает, что преданные могут следовать нити намитика карме ровно настолько, насколько они не покрывают карму. Если Вайшнав проявляет чрезмерную зависимость от этих правил предписаний, вкладывает не слишком много веры, тогда они становятся препятствием для пути преданного служения, поэтому становится уже нарушением принципа бхакти.
So we see that the Parinishata devotee in Baladev's definition is that he follows the Varnashramic rules and all those vidis and all that, but only to teach others, that's all, not because he is attached to it at all.
И поэтому Шрила Баладева Дибушин объясняет, что Вайшнав Паринишита следует правилам Варнашрама, некоторым правилам Варнашрама, только для того, чтобы научить других правильному следованию. Он к ним сам не привязан вообще.
But that has no function in Russia, I think, because you don't have a public who knows these rules and you're not inspiring them to follow those rules.
И в России это вообще неприменимо, потому что, похоже, нет у вас такого сословия людей, которые знают эти правила, и вы вдохновляете правильно этим правилам следовать. The next question.
So,
please go ahead. Sorry, there was a delay.
It's all there. It's for people who are not qualified for bhakti.
Это следование Паринишита Вайшнава этим правилам предназначено людей, которые не квалифицированы на путь бхакти. Он ради них следует этим правилам, чтобы вдохновить их на правильное следование.
So if they're qualified for bhakti, we don't want to emphasize these things too much.
Если же эти люди квалифицированы на путь бхакти, то мы не подчеркиваем в нашей проповеди важность следования этим второстепенным правилам так уж сильно.
So if we tried to preach Varnashram to people instead of bhakti, I think maybe that'd be more difficult even than chanting Hare Krishna.
Sorry, Maharaj, there was a disruption of the last statement. I couldn't hear it completely. Could you please repeat it?
Okay, so it's probably more difficult to preach Varnashram to somebody
Sorry,
that knows nothing about it than to preach bhakti.
То есть это более сложно,
Can you hear?
Partially. Did you say that it's more difficult to preach Bhakti to people who know something about Varnashrama than to those who don't?
Anything about Varnashram, it's very difficult to preach that.
Maharaj, you're
In
breaking
other
up.
words, very difficult to start preaching directly to people about anything about it.
You're breaking up. I'm sorry, I can't hear a complete sentence. Please
Yeah.
Something is wrong with the
So,
line.
Yeah, as I said, I'm on a telephone line.
Oh, yeah.
Is not in the Varnashram system or doesn't know anything about it, it's very difficult to say first do Varnashram,
Yes.
then when you're qualified, do.
Right.
Very difficult.
Yeah, I got it, Maharaj. То есть, если человек вообще ничего не знает о Варнашраме, не следовал никаким правилам Варнашрама, то гораздо сложнее сказать ему, ну вот сначала следуй Варнашраме, потом начни бхакти заниматься, чем если вы имеете дело с человеком, который хотя бы какое-то представление о Варнашраме имеет.
And of course, it's easier to tell someone to chant Hare Krishna than to follow four regulative principles.
И, конечно, легче сказать человеку, повторяй Харе Кришна, чем сказать ему, следуй 4 регулирующим принципам. Ишана Прабhu, ваш вопрос. У вас поднята рука.
Да, Харе Кришна. Меня слышно?
Да, дорогие преданные, если у вас есть вопросы, пишите их в чате, так будет проще переводить, если у вас позволяют технические возможности. Да, пожалуйста.
Вопрос короткий, да. В начале своей лекции Махарадж сказал, что мы можем совершать некие обряды, относящиеся вот к категории там самскар, упанайны, но без веры в них. Вот мог бы Махарадж объяснить, что значит без веры, как можно без веры выполнять обряды, потому что все равно какая-то вера, понимание должно быть их важности и их полезности.
Да, вы, пожалуйста, дорогие преданные, имейте в виду, что я переводил Ванну Махараджу, он говорит очень быстро, и я старался переводить максимально точно, что он говорит, но иногда какие-то неточности я мог допускать, так что сейчас выяснится, что это был неточный перевод, заранее извиняюсь.
Но он трижды повторил это.
Да, ну, значит, так и есть. The question Tishana Prabhu is asking is that in the very beginning of your talk today, you said that we can perform some nitya kriyas like Upanayana and others without having much faith in them. Can you please explain how to perform those samskaras or those ceremonies without having faith in them? What did you mean by that?
That is,
Maharaj,
I don't think that they're necessary. If I don't do them, it's sinful. And if I don't,
Может быть, видео ему отключить?
Yes, Maharaj,
Yeah,
you're breaking up.
so we shouldn't be independent.
If you turn your video off, it might actually give you enough bandwidth to come through clearer. Yes. Sorry for that.
Okay.
As much as we would love to see you, Maharaj, on the screen, but just for the sake of your message. Махарадж сказал, что без веры означает, что мы не верим, что если мы как-то неправильно их совершим или не будем совершать вообще, то это как-то нарушит нашу бхакти. Вот это означает не иметь веры в них. Yes, Maharaj, please continue.
Yeah. So as I said, Prabhupada often, they mentioned about should we do this from Manu Samhita, said this chant Hare Krishna. So Garbhadan Samskar became chanting Hare Krishna rather than chanting some Vedic mantras and doing it according to the the scriptures. So in that sense, simplify it.
Так Шрила Прабхупада подходил к выполнению этих самскар, например, когда у него спрашивали, нужно ли нам следовать правилам из Ману Самхиты, если да, то в какой степени, например, как Гарбадана Самскару проводить, какие мантры нужно читать. Прабхупада просто повторяйте Харе Кришна. Так в исполнении Шрилы Прабхупады вот исследование этому правилу Гарбадана Самскара превратилось в повторение Харе Кришна, максимально упрощенное для нас.
Gopal Bhatta Goswami also took all of these samskars from the Vedas, like Samveda or whatever, and then he took all the names of Devatas out and he put names of Vishnu in instead to make it more compatible to the Vaishnava.
Например, Гопал Бхатта Госвами, когда он составлял свои смрити-шастры для вайшнавов, он взял различные мантры из, например, самоведы и других вед, и эти мантры посвящены полубогам, он удалил из них имена полубогов, и вместо этих имен полубогов вставил имена Господа Вишну. И так он сделал эти правила самскар для вайшнавов более приемлемыми. Maharaj, another question is from Pavana Prabhu. Is there any difference between following the principles of Varnashrama in cities, in an urban setting, or in villages? In the context of modern society, are there any differences between Varnashrama rules for these two different locales?
Oh, well, for traditionally, no, whether you were in the village or in the thing, you would follow your Varna rules and your ashram rules, whatever Varna and ashram you were in. It would be the same rule. If you're a Brahmana, you would follow the Brahman rules in the village or in the city, or if you're Kshatriya, you'd follow the same rules. As for ИСККОН, of course, I don't know, because we haven't really established what rules to follow for.
Вопрос Павана Прабху. Есть ли какая-то разница в принципах Варнашрама в городах, деревнях, в условиях современного общества? Махарадж сказал, в традиционном обществе Варнашрама нет разницы. Там браманы следуют тем же самым правилам, неважно, где они жили, в городах или деревнях. И то же самое кшатрии. Они следуют тем же самым правилам, неважно, где они жили, в городах и деревнях. Что же касается ИСККОН, современного общества, то тут нет ясности, потому что мы до сих пор не разобрались, как эту Варнашраму устанавливать, и нужны ли правила разные или одинаковые. Yes, Maharaj. Is that all you wanted to say on that?
Yeah.
Есть ли еще вопросы, дорогие преданные, по презентации Бану Махараджа, потому что вы услышали вопрос от Прамьятмы Прабху. There is a question from Pramyatma Prabhu. To which extent are we entitled to use the term Varnashrama in our movement in ISKCON? For instance, when we have a twice initiated devotee working at a factory, and we call him a Brahmana, but he works as a Shudra, can we apply principles of Varnashrama or classification, nomenclature of Varnashrama to this particular situation, for instance? Вопрос от Прамьятмы Прабху, насколько мы правомочно использовать термин Varnashrama в нашем обществе ИСККОН. Кто-то дважды инициированный работает на заводе, а мы говорим, что он Брахман, но он работает как Шудра.
Yeah. So the Brahmana has his particular occupation, but in emergencies he can do other work also.
У Брахмана есть определенные обязанности и определенные предписанные ему занятия, но в чрезвычайных ситуациях он может выполнять обязанности других варн также.
But his normal situation is to do his brahmanical work.
Но в обычном течении дел он занимается брахманической деятельностью.
But when we're devotees, it's a little bit different.
Но что касается нас, как преданных, то здесь ситуация обстоит несколько иначе.
So we do anything at any time for Krishna.
Можем делать все, что угодно, любой вид деятельности для Кришны.
So therefore, using the Varna for our profession may not be so apt for Vaishnava, because he could do any profession and do it for Krishna, and then it's transcendental.
Потому что и таким образом применять эту номенклатуру варн, чтобы определять то, чем может заниматься Вайшнав, и чем он не может заниматься, не совсем корректно, потому что преданный может заниматься чем угодно для Кришны.
The scientific aspect, or I don't know, psychological aspect maybe, of this would be that you have to have your profession and your main work to support your family according to your mental, physical nature.
Можно применить к этому такой психологический научный подход. Это мы можем использовать определенную природу, к которой мы склонны, психологическую и психическую природу, для того, чтобы заниматься той деятельностью, которая наиболее подходит для поддержания семьи.
And then you'll be happy.
И вы тогда будете счастливы.
But now what we do when we take second initiation, we also become Brahminical, so to speak. We get a Brahman.
Получаем второе посвящение, мы в каком-то смысле слова становимся браманами, обретаем браманическую природу.
So, of course, this doesn't mean that everybody automatically somehow becomes very scholarly. This suddenly changes nature. Doesn't really, we don't see that taking place.
Но, разумеется, это не означает, что просто получив второе посвящение, преданный немедленно меняет свою природу и становится ученым, склонным к изучению шастр. Мы видим, что природа, с которой преданный живет и родился, не меняется от второго посвящения.
But what it does mean that because we're a Vaishnava, we surpass the Brahmana.
Но что это означает, что мы, как вайшнавы, поднимаемся над уровнем брамана.
And the Vaishnava means he's surrendered to Krishna. So whether he still has a Sudra-like body or mentality, whatever, but he's a great Vaishnava, then that's more important. So that's why we give him the Brahmin thread, because he's better than a Vaishnava, better than a Brahmin, not because he has Brahminical.
И даже если преданный сохраняет свои какие-то наклонности, может быть, даже наклонности шудры, может быть, у него тело похоже на тело шудры, какой-то менталитет. Шудра, но если он преданный, серьезный преданный, тогда он уже автоматически ставится поднявшимся над уровнем брамана, и поэтому в знак этого ему вручается шнур, как символ того, что он уже превзошел уровень брамана, как вайшнав.
So maybe better that we don't say that second initiated people are brahmanas, we should say that they're Vaishnavas.
Поэтому вместо того, чтобы называть дважды инициированных людей браманы в нашем движении, мы лучше, наверное, называть их вайшнавами. Maharaj. Thank you very much. We have quite a few questions on this topic, and we have one hand raised by Gaura Krishna Prabhu. His hand went up first, and then we have a few written questions in the chat. So I'll let Gaura Krishna Prabhu ask his question, and then we'll go back to the written questions in the chat. Gaura Krishna Prabhu, можете на английском задать вопросы и потом перевести сами также, потому что у нас сейчас нет синхронного перевода. Нужно микрофон включить.
Yes. Prabhupada sometimes mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam that one of the use of the Varnashrama in regular life of the people that regulate their activity and reduce like enemies like Matsari, etc. And also he's saying that this division Varnashrama, this division common for all people, like universal, even if it is formally not making like Varnashrama Dharma, but in any society we can find out this division. And also in lectures he's mentioned that every religion or every dharma, so I mentioned like Hindu Dharma, Christian Dharma, Muslim Dharma, it's saying that for us it's always good if you love the God. So for our preaching in our countries, it's possible, it's useful if we are show like exemplary, like Parinishta devotees, we show example following the local dharma. Let's say this is like same as Varnashrama in Hindu society, like to what I'm translating, okay? Yes. It can be possible that like Russian Vaishnavas, they cultivate for the example, they cultivate like local dharma, something like that, local religion, like Hindu Varnashrama. I'm translating in Russian briefly. Прабхупада часто говорит, что Варнашрама Дхарма предназначена также, вот ее материалистичный аспект, для регулирования деятельности в обществе, чтобы снизить соперничество и вражду. Также он говорит, что Варнашрама существует, сам принцип существует ее везде, во всем мире, в любом обществе. И вот сегодня я читал лекцию там Прабхупады, что он говорит, что вот нам, говорит, преданным, нам не важно общество преданных, какая дарма, хинду-дарма, мусульманская дарма или христианская, мы все равно как бы вот у нас все хорошо, лишь если вы Бога любите. Вот вопрос, практично ли, правильно ли, что преданные на местах, где нету вот индуизма и так далее, то они вот как бы пропагандируют, исследуют и применяют местную религию, местную дарму, то есть они идеальные, вот, ну, то есть для того, чтобы научить людей, они принимают эти ценности, как-то вот следуют этому. Вот. Yes, Maharaj. Yes.
What's the question? The question is, can we preach like?
Yes. Could we use the local dharma?
Yeah.
As the Varnashrama, like something like it's practically more practical than explain to people what it means Varnashrama, whatever. Like,
you can use the local terms and whatever. The only thing is that we consider the Vedic Varnashrama more sophisticated, a little more scientific, so to speak, and precise in how it is laid out in terms of gunas, because they don't have gunas, concept of gunas in the Western world, and that it's progressive, birth after birth, you can rise up by restricting your senses more and more as you go up until you come to Sattva Gun, things like that. So a little more scientific, and ultimately, of course, we're trying to get people to worship God. So,
А система варнашамы в Индии, ведическая варнашама, она гораздо более изощрена, гораздо более детализирована, и она более научна. Под научностью Махарадж говорит, я имею в виду, что, например, в ведическом обществе существует понятие гун, в то время как на Западе эта система отсутствует, понимать понятие о гунах, эта классификация отсутствует. Поэтому в системе варнашамы человек мог, например, последуя ей, прогрессировать из жизни в жизнь, пока постепенно не поднимался до саттва гуны и в конце концов не приходил к пониманию Бога. Поэтому мы следуем в ведической системе варнашамы как наиболее научной, наиболее тщательно детализированной и описанной.
Okay. Okay.
We have quite a few written questions, Maharaj. We have about 15 more minutes for the class. Of course, we can go over time, but we don't want to impose on your time. And by the way, I failed to mention to you in the beginning that Bhaktivedanta Maharaj apologized that he couldn't be part of this session today, even though he invited you to participate. It just happens to be his Vyasa Puja today, and he's busy, you know where. So he usually always greets our guests and participates in these discussions, but he couldn't do that today, and he profusely apologized for that. Yes, the question is, one of the questions was, Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha, do they relate only to Varnashama? Are they parts of the Varnashama consideration? Вопрос Парамананда Пури Прабhu. Dharma, Artha, Kama, и Moksha относятся не только к системе Varnashama?
well, yeah. Artha, Dharma, Kama is, we could say, Varnashram system. And then when we get to the Jnana, let's say Karma Yoga, and when we get to Jnana, that's Moksha. So Jnana Yoga is the Moksha, and Karma Yoga is the rest of the Varnashram system. The rules are all the Dharma, and the goals are Artha and Kama. Artha means support your body, get a means of living, and then the Kama is get a little extra enjoyment.
So moksha is not technically part of the Varnashama system, is it?
Oh yeah, it is, because that's a sannyasi.
Oh, it is, okay. So, да, Dharma, Artha, Kama и Мокша относятся к Варнашама Дхарме. Мокша – это связано с гьяна-йогой, достигается гьяной, и карма-йога предназначена для того, чтобы человек мог развить Дхарму, Арту и Каму. Дхарма является целью, Арта и Кама – это метод достижения этой цели, и Кама – это вещь, которая дает нам некоторые дополнительные наслаждения, бонус в виде наслаждения на пути следования всем этим правилам. Поэтому, да, они относятся к Варнашама Дхарме, все 4 аспекта. Next question, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Why did Gopal Bhatta describe samskaras for Vaishnavas, and which of those we're supposed to follow? Вопрос Антакела, для чего Гопал Бхатта Госвами описывал самскары для вайшнавов, каким из них нужно нам следовать?
Well, as I said, the followers of Lord Chaitanya were within that society, and many of them were Brahmanas or Kshatriyas or Vaishyas. So they basically followed the samskars, they had marriages, etc. But the traditional mantras involved worship of devatas, etc. So he wanted to modify that so it becomes more Vaishnavic. So he took all the devata names out and gave them mantras with names of Vishnu instead.
Гопал Бхатта Госвами, как последователь Господа Чайтаньи, также принадлежал к тому обществу, в котором жили они. И, как я уже отметил сегодня, большинство последователей Господа Чайтаньи, они были грехастхами, и они принадлежали также разным сословиям, шудрам, вайшьям, кшатриям, некоторым браманам. И они следовали принципам общества, в котором они жили, обществом традиционной варнашамы. И Гопал Бхатта Госвами просто взял эти самскары, мантры, которыми используют для проведения самскары, заменил в них имена полубогов на имена Господа Вишну, чтобы делать их более приемлемыми для вайшнавов. Вот и все. His question was, which samskaras of those described by Gopal Bhatta we're supposed to follow?
Which ones we're supposed to follow? Yes. Well, at least marriage ceremony.
И вопрос также Антакела Прабху был о том, каким нам следовать из тех, что описал Гопал Бхатта Госвами. Говорит, по крайней мере, Махараш отвечает, виваха самскару нужно проводить.
In the Gaudiya Math, they also do the Upanayam samskar. That's second initiation. What they don't call second initiation, but when they after they give the Krishna mantra, Krishnaya Govindaya, etc., then they give the Brahma Gayatri. And to give the Brahma Gayatri, they do Upanayana Samskar for the men, nothing for the women.
Например, в Гаудима также они следуют Упанайна Самскари, также проводят ее. Они дают вначале мантру Кришна Говиндая, Гопиджана Валабая, потом дают после нее Брахма Гайатри мантру, и потом проводят небольшую церемонию Упанайны для мужчин. Для женщин эта церемония не проводится в Гаудима.
So Prabhupada often mentions the Garbhadan Samskar, pregnancy, impregnation Samskar.
И также Прабхупада часто упоминает Гарбадана Самскару и Самскару зачатия. Next question.
And one other one that's often done also is hair cutting.
Еще одна самскара, которую часто проводят, церемония обрезания волос ребенка. Yes, Maharaj. Shall I read the next question? Amala Chandra Prabhu asks, could we say that the organizational structure of ISKCON by itself is an element of Varnashama, because we have leaders, GBC, we have a consulting body, Shastic Advisory Council, we have some sponsors and devotees who do some business, conduct business enterprises, and they contribute towards ISKCON on behalf of ISKCON, and we have the rest. Can we draw parallels between the structure that ISKCON has currently and Varnashama system? Вопрос, сказать, что сама по себе организационная структура в ИСККОН это элемент есть Варнашама. Есть элемент Варнашама, есть руководитель GBC, есть консультативные органы, Shastic Advisory Council, комитет по изучению шастры, и спонсор, и преданный ведущий бизнес, это не ИСККОН, и все остальные.
I would think any organization, even a business company or a country, any country in the world has to have these categories. You have to have the labor, you have to have the people that supply the food, you have to have the administrators, and you have to have the thinkers. You have to have that in any organization.
Махарадж сказал, что это отвечает, что это не уникальная ситуация для ИСККОН, потому что любая вообще организация, любая, даже любая страна мира должна иметь все эти 4 элемента. Должны быть те, кто работает, те, кто производит продукты питания, должны быть те, кто руководят, и должны быть мыслители или философы, или идеологи. В любой организации, в любой маломальски организованной стране есть эти 4 элемента.
But in the Varnashram system, as we know it in the past, what was special was that these things were quite strictly divided, and they didn't interact. The Varnas didn't interact with each other much. They only operated within their own Varna. They married within their own Varna, etc. So it was a little more strict in that way.
Но в традиционной системе Варнашрама прошлого, как мы уже сказали, варны были очень строго разделены и разграничены. Они фактически друг с другом не общались, не пересекались, и вся их социальная жизнь проходила в рамках своей варны. Например, они женились там в своей варне, общались там в варне и так далее. И были очень строго разделены друг от друга.
And they had different rules to follow. The Sudras had less rules, the Vaishyas a little more rules, Kshatriyas more rules, and more rules for Brahmanas.
И у них также был разный набор правил, которым они должны были следовать. Самый минимальный набор был для шудр, затем больше для вайши, больше для кшатров, и для браманов было максимальное число правил, которым они должны были следовать.
But within our society, ISKCON, then we all follow the same rules.
А в ИСККОН мы все следуем одним и тем же правилам. Next question, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Ишана Прабhu задает вопрос. Just a second, I'll read through it. Can we call the circumstances in which people in the age of Kali live as an emergency situation? And based on that, can we approach the, can we perform our prescribed duties in terms of us being in an emergency situation? In general. Вопрос, а можно ли в условиях жизни, в которых живут люди в Кали-югу, в целом отнести к чрезвычайной ситуации, основываться на этом обстоятельстве в вопросах исполнения своих обязанностей?
Well, for one thing, I don't know if we can even say there's a Varnashram system in Kali-yuga, because it's described in Bhagavatam that the last king disappeared and he's hiding in the Himalayas and he won't come out until the next Satya Yuga. So there really is no king to enforce the Varnashram system as such.
Но вообще в Кали-югу варнашрам это весьма сомнительное занятие, потому что, как говорится в Бхагаватам, последние цари, они скрылись в Гималаях давно, и поэтому царей настоящих нет, которые могли бы добиваться неукоснительного следования системе варнашрама, они не появятся до начала следующей сати-юги.
And if you don't have a ruler, a strong ruler, people do whatever they want, and then you can't really have orderly varnas.
И поэтому, если у нас нет такого сильного правителя, который мог бы поддерживать систему варнашрам и добиваться выполнения ее правил, то люди будут делать все, что им заблагорассудится, и не будет никакой возможности поддерживать эти классы общества, варны и прочее.
And of course, in Kali Yuga, all the varnas get mixed up. The people marry, intercaste marriage, all this, so the varnas are not well defined by birth at all anymore.
И также в Кали-югу люди женятся друг на друге, ну, друг дружки как угодно. Поэтому эти межкастовые браки стали нормой, и поэтому уже невозможно определить принадлежность человека к той или иной варне по рождению.
So it's very difficult even for people in India to really practice varnashram.
Поэтому даже для людей в Индии очень сложно следовать системе варнашрама сейчас. I guess Ishana Prabhu's question, where he was coming from what I understand, is that you mentioned that we as Vaishnavas sometimes can work ostensibly as Shudras, and that is covered by that provision in the Bhagavatam that a Brahmana can perform.
That's in the Smriti Shastras. Yeah, you can do that. So it's constantly in Kali Yuga. As I said, the varnas even aren't well defined, for one thing. And so therefore, you know, the whole thing is mixed up and the professions are mixed up, everything. So basically the whole thing is topsy-turvy anyway. So you just do whatever you can to survive.
Я также дополнил Махараджа вопрос Ишаны Прабху. Насколько я понимаю, он хотел спросить, поскольку Махарадж упомянул, что браманам разрешается иногда выполнять обязанности других варн в условиях чрезвычайных обстоятельств. Вот он спросил, сейчас чрезвычайные, достаточно ли чрезвычайные обстоятельства? Сейчас можно было этим принципом руководствоваться. Махарадж сказал, что в Кали-югу вообще варны не определены, границы между ними размыты, и определять по варне или по рождению род деятельности человека тоже совершенно невозможно. Люди делают все, что угодно, и все вверх тормашками. Фактически люди сейчас живут, чтобы выжить как-то, и поэтому для того, чтобы выжить, они занимаются тем, чем могут. Вот сейчас как обстоят дела с их приписанными обязанностями. Shall I ask the next question, Maharaj? Question. I'll have to read through it. Just a second. Yes. So you mentioned that in the system of Varnashrama, what is sin for one Varna is not so for another Varna. Is it applicable to ИСККОН? For instance, we all take vows at initiations, and it's not a secret that some devotees cannot follow those vows that they took at the initiation ceremony. And Srila Prabhupada said that we have a way of Brahminical society. We maintain the mode of goodness. We don't drink, we don't smoke. So how does that apply? We have a pretty large, you could say, community or stratum of devotees who cannot take initiation because they cannot follow all the principles, but they don't follow all the principles, and they chant some japa, but not the japa required to get initiated. Maybe we should have some differentiated approach to initiations, because some people cannot follow all the rules.
Very good question.
Очень хороший вопрос Паваны Прабху по поводу. Я прочитаю. I'll have to read it out loud, Maharaj. I'm sorry, it's a bit long, so I'll have to read it in Russian, so devotees know what to answer into. Вы упомянули, что варнашами то, что грех для одной варны, не является грехом для другой. Как это применимо к ИСККОН? Мы все даем одни обеты на инициации. Не секрет, что не все потом могут им следовать. Но при этом Шрила Прабхупада говорил, что у нас браманическое общество гуна благости, в ней не пьют, не курят и так далее. При этом есть достаточно широкая прослойка общества, людей, кто не может получить инициацию, но сколько-то повторяет джапы, каким-то принципам следует. Может быть, у нас должен быть дифференцированный стандарт и подход, и как быть с посвящением тем, кто не может следовать всему. Yes, Maharaj.
So our basic Vaishnava principles, the four regulative principles, are very Brahminical.
На самом деле эти принципы вайшнава, 4 регулирующие принципы, они очень браманичны по своей сути.
And we can't expect that everybody immediately is going to become Brahminical.
И мы не можем ожидать, что все люди сразу разовьют в себе брахманические качества.
But of course, we know that by doing bhakti, we can surpass the gunas.
Но, разумеется, как мы все знаем, если мы следуем принципам бхакти, мы можем подняться над влиянием гун.
And that is why at second initiation, you also get a Brahman thread in the Brahma Gayatri mantra to show you've surpassed the Brahmana.
И также во время второго посвящения мы получаем браманический шнур и получаем брахма-гайтри, чтобы подчеркнуть, что мы поднялись над уровнем брамана.
So you are expected, therefore, to follow those regulative principles.
И поэтому от вас ожидается строгое следование этим регулирующим принципам браманической жизни.
But at the same time, we're supposed to preach to everybody.
Но в то же самое время мы должны проповедовать всем.
So it is, if we're going to make a rule that everybody has to follow the four regulative principles, that's going to be very difficult for everybody.
Но если мы сделаем правилом, что все должны обязательно следовать этим регулирующим принципам, чтобы заниматься бхакти, это будет сложно для многих.
Even in India, our prime minister is very, dharmic, etc. But he cannot say no killing of animals, no cow slaughter. He can't make a government rule like that.
Например, в современной Индии сейчас премьер-министр Индии Нарендра Моди очень такой дхармичный человек, следует принципам дхармы, поддерживает их всячески, но при этом даже он не может объявить в стране правило, что теперь никаких животных убивать не будут. Это запрещено законом. Он не сможет такой закон сделать.
Therefore, in our preaching also, we should not expect that everybody's going to come up to that level immediately. That's the goal, of course, to become good Vaishnavas. But if they can't do that, at least let them chant Hare Krishna.
Поэтому мы не можем также требовать от всех, ожидать от всех, что они сразу немедленно поднимутся до уровня, на котором должны находиться хорошие вайшнавы. Но мы, по крайней мере, можем всем проповедовать необходимость повторения Харе Кришна.
By the power of the name, eventually they get purified and they can follow those principles later on.
И благодаря силе, могуществу Святого Имени смогут очиститься и начать или суметь следовать всем этим правилам в будущем.
So perhaps we should not be so narrow-minded or prejudiced to think he's a devotee because he's got a Brahman thread, or he's second initiated, or he's initiated, or whatever, and he's following all the principles. We can think of devotees of lesser categories also and not disrespect them.
Поэтому не нужно относиться с предубеждением тем преданным, которые не входят в эти категории дважды инициированных и инициированных преданных, которые могут всем принципам строго следовать. Есть другие преданные, они тоже преданные, но пока не поднялись до уровня строгого следования. И мы должны их уважать также. Maharaj, can I ask you next question? We have a few, and again, we have already reached the time limit. Of course, we can go over time. It depends on your time availability. I just don't want...
1 hour. I have to fly off to Hyderabad in 1 hour for a deity installation. So.
Right, so we'll have to finish at this point. Maybe I'll just skim through I'll just look through the questions to see if they have any questions we haven't addressed yet, because some of them are repetitive. Yes. So yes, Bhakti Bhagavatamrita Keshava Maharaj, and his will be the last question. In traditional Varnashrama system, people followed their duties as an offering to Krishna. Nowadays, people work in economics in the system of economy, and the economical system of the world is geared towards sense gratification. It's increase of sense gratification. Is it correct to teach people to follow their prescribed duties in the modern economic system as an offering to the Lord? In other words, Maharaj is saying that there is a contradiction between the former system of Varnashram, where people were encouraged to follow their prescribed duties, and the modern system, which is based on sense gratification. Can we encourage them to follow, to do their prescribed duties in this modern system of society as an offering to the Lord? Can I translate it to Russian? Yes, that's what his question was. In other words, he's not talking probably about people, about devotees. He's talking about people in general. В традиционной системе Варнашрам люди исполняли все свои обязанности как по отношению к Кришне. Сейчас люди работают в экономической системе, которая направлена, как правило, на увеличение чувственных наслаждений. Правильно ли, тем не менее, обучать людей выполнять свои обязанности даже в современной экономической системе, как служение Господу? Yes, Махарадж. Дорогие преданные, это будет последний вопрос, потому что, к сожалению, Махарадж должен через час лететь на установление божеств в Гайдарабад, и ему нужно его отпустить. Поэтому, простите, мы на этом завершим его часть, но мы, пожалуйста, не расходитесь, мы устроим небольшое обсуждение в группе, как в прошлый раз. Я попрошу Гуру Кришна Прабху снова подготовить вопросы для обсуждения, чтобы они были у вас перед глазами. Yes, Maharaj.
So most of the devotees are going to be grihastas, and they have to support a family.
Большинство преданных будут грихастхами, нужно поддерживать свои семьи.
And those who are not devotees, of course, most are going to get married also.
А те люди, которые не являются преданными, также в большинстве своем заводят семьи.
So they have to have some means of supporting themselves and supporting their families.
Поэтому им не нужно зарабатывать на жизнь так, что поддержите себя и свои семьи.
And most of the time they have to get a job, and the job is somebody who's not a devotee.
Sorry, Maharaj, I couldn't get
A job, and it's under some boss who's not a devotee.
Right.
Company.
Да, и часто преданно приходится устраиваться на работу, или людям в целом приходится устраиваться на работу в какой-то компании, предприятии, и обычно их начальник не преданный.
So this is the nature of Kali Yuga. Everybody's more or less Sudra. They're just employed by somebody and they work.
И это такова природа Кали-юги. Все в большей или меньшей степени шудры, потому что им приходится работать на кого-то, на какого-то начальника.
So what can they do? They have to they have to support themselves and their family. They have to work under somebody who's not a devotee. The only thing they can is to use some of that money that they get and also use that for Krishna instead of just supporting themselves and their family. Use some of that for Krishna.
И что же им делать? Им нужно работать, нужно поддерживать свою семью, работать нужно в каких-то компаниях, обычных компаниях, и там начальник не преданный, им приходится работать на него. Единственное, что им остается сделать, это просто использовать плоды своего труда, деньги, которые они заработают, какой-то часть этих денег для Кришны, а не только для своей семьи. That's
Okay.
all. Yes, Maharaj. Yes, thank you so much. Looks like we have exhausted all our questions. I mean, we have a couple left. I don't know if you have 2 extra minutes, so we could finish all the questions.
2 minutes is okay.
So you said that in ISKCON we follow the same principles. Does it mean that in ISKCON we have only Brahmanas, or if we want to spread Krishna consciousness far and wide, we also should apply some differentiation to what kind of principles we propose or present to people at large? That's the question.
Oh, that's kind of like a previous.
I think you have covered already that question. Вопрос Карабаджана Прабху о том, что в ИСККОН одни принципы, но значит ли это, что мы все как бы браманы, нужно ли принять дифференциацию проповеди сознания Кришны в массах? Махарадж сказал, что на этот вопрос уже ответил в одном из предыдущих вопросов.
So Harinam is very flexible and it can be adapted to anybody at any place at any time. So we can preach to everybody.
Харинам очень гибкая вещь, гибкий метод проповеди. Можем применить его очень легко и творчески к любым обстоятельствам, к любому человеку в любых условиях. Это наша гибкость. Thank you so much, Maharaj. We do want to hold you longer, but we don't want you to miss your flight. And thank you very much for your very elucidating and very deep and meaningful presentation, which has clarified a lot of questions from many of us, I'm sure. And we look forward to inviting you again to this Bhaktivedanta University. As Bhaktivedanta Maharaj told you, this is an educational project meant for ISKCON leaders in Russia. This session is being recorded and will be available for those leaders who couldn't participate in the session today live. And we'll also discuss it now that we will thank you again, and we will break devotees into groups and we'll discuss for a few minutes what we have heard.
Exams also?
Yeah, we'll have an exam as well. Yes, not immediately, but we will eventually. Yes, thank you so much, Maharaj.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. Have a safe flight. Hare Krishna.
Bye.
Hare Krishna.